The execution tower stood at the center of Vale Cross like a scar the kingdom refused to heal. Every morning crowds gathered beneath it to stare at the chained Orc Queen as if she were some kind of animal carved from old war stories instead of flesh and blood. Children pointed at her tusks. Merchants whispered about the battles she once won. Drunken soldiers threw rotten fruit whenever they wanted cheap entertainment. And through all of it, Queen Maelra of the Ashfang clans never knelt. Not once in 3 years. Elias noticed that first. Most people saw a monster. Elias saw someone exhausted. He worked in the royal stables beside the lower market district, shoveling manure for copper scraps barely worth counting. At 17 years old, he owned exactly 3 shirts, 1 pair of boots with holes near the toes, and a tiny rented room above a butcher shop that smelled permanently of blood and onions. Every day he carried water buckets past the execution square, and every day he saw the queen standing beneath the tower wrapped in thick iron chains glowing faintly blue with suppression magic. The chains looked heavy enough to anchor ships. Still, she carried them like pride instead of punishment. That winter arrived colder than usual. Snow buried the streets knee-deep, while hungry people crowded around fire barrels at night, trying not to freeze. Elias began noticing strange things whenever he passed the tower after dark. Guards mocked the queen constantly, yet starving children somehow always found scraps of bread left near the base of her prison platform. Once Elias even saw Maelra quietly slide her untouched meal through the bars toward a little girl hiding nearby. The child ran before guards noticed. Maelra said nothing. That disturbed Elias more than if she had roared, because monsters were supposed to enjoy cruelty. But the queen looked tired every time soldiers beat prisoners near the square. She looked angry whenever guards kicked beggars away from marketplace fires. And once, very late at night, Elias caught her staring upward at falling snow with such terrible sadness that he couldn't stop thinking about it afterward. People whispered horrifying stories about the Ashfang queen, that she burned villages, that she drank enemy blood after battle, that she once ripped a man apart with her bare hands. Maybe some of it was true, but none of those stories matched the woman Elias saw standing silently beneath winter snowfall feeding starving children with her own food. Then came the night everything changed. A group of drunken nobles arrived near midnight carrying wine bottles and laughing loudly enough to wake half the district. Elias had been finishing late stable work when he heard shouting from the square. Curious and uneasy, he climbed the nearby alley stairs overlooking the tower. For guards surrounded Maelra. One noble demanded she kneel before the kingdom's banner. She refused. The first punch split her lip. The second knocked her to one knee. Still she refused. Bow. One soldier snarled, kicking her chains hard enough to rattle iron across stone. Show respect to your betters. Maelra slowly lifted her head. Even bleeding, she looked terrifying. I already did, she said quietly. 3 years ago when I surrendered instead of letting your armies slaughter civilians. One guard hit her across the face with a metal baton. Elias flinched. Nobody else did. The nobles laughed. Again the soldiers struck her. Ribs, stomach, face. And through all of it, the queen never begged. Something inside Elias twisted painfully then. Maybe pity. Maybe anger. Maybe simply exhaustion from watching cruelty become normal. Before he fully understood what he was doing, Elias slipped down the alley stairs carrying the small iron cutter he used at the stables. The guards had wandered toward the tavern afterward, drunk and distracted, leaving Maelra chained alone beneath the tower while snow fell silently around her. Up close she looked worse, bruised, bleeding, half frozen, but her amber eyes snapped toward him instantly sharp enough to stop his heartbeat. You should leave, boy, she rasped. Elias knelt beside the chains anyway. I can't. The queen stared at him like she couldn't understand the words. Elias raised the cutter with trembling hands. And for the first time in 3 years, someone touched the chains. The moment the iron cutter touched the glowing restraint around Queen Maelra's wrists, the chain screamed. Not rattled, not cracked, screamed. The sound exploded across the execution square like metal being tortured alive, sharp enough that Elias dropped the cutter instantly and clutched his ears. Blue light erupted from the enchanted shackles, flooding the snow-covered streets with violent flashes that turned the falling snow almost white. Runes carved into the iron ignited one after another, ancient symbols burning like open wounds. Maelra's eyes widened in sudden panic. "Run," she growled. Then the chain snapped. The shockwave threw Elias backward across the frozen stones hard enough to knock the breath from his lungs. Windows shattered nearby. Horses screamed in the royal stables below the hill. Bells immediately began ringing somewhere deep inside the capital. Alarm bells. The queen doubled over violently, gasping like someone drowning after years underwater. Steam rose from her skin while faint red markings spread across her arms beneath the broken chains. Elias stared in horror. What happened? Maelra slowly lifted her head. For one terrifying second, her amber eyes glowed bright gold. Then the light vanished. "Fool boy," she rasped. "You should never have broken them." Shouts erupted nearby. "Guards! Coming fast!" Elias heard boots pounding through the square while torches flickered at the far end of the street. "They know," he whispered. "Of course they know," Maelra snarled, forcing herself upright despite the remaining chains dragging behind her. Those restraints were tied directly to the palace ward system. Another bell rang. Then another. The entire capital was waking. Panic slammed into Elias all at once. His hands shook violently as he grabbed the iron cutter again. He should run. Gods, he should already be gone. The punishment for aiding prisoners was execution. The punishment for helping the Ashfang queen escape would probably involve inventing entirely new forms of suffering. But when he looked at her bleeding face, at the bruises darkening beneath snowfall, he couldn't leave. Not now. Not after this. "Can you move?" he asked. Maelra gave him a look halfway between disbelief and irritation. "I was conquering kingdoms before your parents learned each other's names." "Right." Elias swallowed hard. "Stupid question." The queen grabbed the broken chain still attached to her wrist and wrapped it around her forearm like a weapon. "Now move." The first guards rounded the corner seconds later. "There," one shouted. "The queen's loose." Crossbows lifted instantly. Elias froze. Maelra did not. She moved so fast it barely looked human. One moment she stood beside him bleeding and half-starved. The next, she slammed the broken chain into the nearest guard hard enough to throw him into a market cart. Wood exploded everywhere. Another soldier raised his sword, but Maelra caught his wrist mid-swing and hurled him across the square like he weighed nothing. The remaining guards hesitated. That hesitation saved Elias's life. "Run!" Maelra barked. This time Elias obeyed. They sprinted through narrow alleyways while bells roared endlessly behind them. Snow lashed across rooftops. More soldiers flooded the streets, every second shouting orders and blocking intersections. Somewhere above them, horns sounded from the palace walls. The capital was locking down. "How are there this many guards?" Elias gasped while sliding across an icy corner. "Because I am important," Maelra replied darkly. Arrows clattered against stone nearby. Elias yelped. Maelra grabbed the back of his coat and dragged him sideways just before another bolt struck the wall where his head had been. "Less screaming," she growled. "I'm trying." They burst into the lower market district crowded with late-night refugees and laborers scrambling out of the way as soldiers pushed through the streets. Elias's mind raced, desperately searching for somewhere safe. Then suddenly he remembered. The sewers. Maelra looked disgusted immediately. "No. You have better idea?" Behind them came another wave of shouting. The queen glanced back once, then swore under her breath. "Lead." Elias pulled open an old drainage grate hidden beside the butcher district and dropped into darkness first. The smell hit instantly, horrible enough to make his eyes water. Behind him, Maelra landed heavily in ankle-deep water with a chain-rattling crash. Above them, soldiers stormed past the alley entrance. Neither moved. For several long seconds, only dripping water echoed through the tunnels. Then Maelra leaned heavily against the sewer wall, breathing hard. Too hard. Elias frowned immediately. "You're hurt worse than I thought." The queen laughed bitterly. "You broke suppression chains forged by royal magi." Her voice sounded strained now. "Those restraints were not merely holding me prisoner." Cold dread slid through Elias's stomach. What were they doing? Maelra slowly looked up at him through the darkness. "Keeping something inside me asleep." The deeper tunnels beneath Veilcross smelled like rot, old water, and forgotten things. Elias led the way carrying a stolen lantern, while Queen Maelra followed several steps behind, the broken remains of her chains dragging loudly through the sewer water. Every sound echoed endlessly through the darkness. Somewhere far above them, the capital still rang with alarm bells, but down here the city felt distant, almost unreal. Elias kept glancing back at her. The queen looked worse by the minute. Her breathing had grown uneven. Sweat covered her skin despite the freezing cold. Strange crimson marks pulsed faintly beneath the surface of her arms like glowing cracks spreading through stone. "You're dying," Elias said quietly. Maelra shot him an annoyed look. Observant. That wasn't sarcasm. It should have been. Even exhausted, she somehow sounded dangerous. They turned down another tunnel until the sewer finally opened into ancient underground catacombs beneath the old districts. Rows of cracked stone tombs stretched into darkness, while faded statues watched silently from the shadows. Elias had heard stories about these ruins as a child. Supposedly parts of the old city existed beneath the capital from before the war, before humans ruled everything. "This place safe?" Maelra asked. "Safer than outside." "Low standard." Elias set the lantern down beside an old crypt wall while Maelra slowly lowered herself onto the cold stone floor. For the first time since escaping, she looked genuinely exhausted. Not weak, just worn down beyond reason. Elias crouched nearby uncertainly. "What did you mean before?" he asked carefully. "About the chains keeping something asleep?" The queen stayed silent for several moments. Then finally, "Orc rulers carry bloodline magic." Elias blinked. "I thought that was just stories. Most humans think many things are stories." Bitterness edged her voice. "Until those stories burn their armies alive." The crimson marks along her arms flickered brighter for a second before fading again. "The chains suppressed my connection to it," she continued quietly. "Every year they drained more of my strength. Eventually they would have killed me." Elias stared. "So why keep you alive at all?" A dark expression crossed Maelra's face. "Because dead enemies become martyrs." She looked upward toward the city above them. "Broken enemies become warnings." The realization settled heavily in Elias's chest. For 3 years the kingdom displayed her beneath the execution tower, not because they feared killing her, because they feared what her death might inspire. "You surrendered willingly," Elias said slowly. Maelra's jaw tightened instantly. "Yes." "Why?" Silence filled the catacombs. Long. Heavy. Then finally she answered. "Because children were trapped inside Ashridge when the capital armies breached the walls." Her voice grew distant, colder somehow. "The royal generals promised they would spare civilians if I surrendered myself publicly." Elias already knew the answer before asking. "They lied." "Yes." The single word carried enough grief to silence the entire underground world. Maelra leaned her head back against the crypt wall and closed her eyes briefly. Thousands died anyway. Elias swallowed hard. Everything he learned growing up painted the Ashfang Queen as a monster who refused peace until humanity defeated her. But none of those stories mentioned surrender. None mentioned civilians. None mentioned betrayal. "What really happened during the war?" he whispered. The queen opened her eyes again. And for the first time since meeting her, Elias saw not anger inside them, only exhaustion. "The same thing that always happens during war," she said quietly. "Powerful men decided ordinary people were acceptable losses." Footsteps echoed suddenly through distant tunnels. Both froze instantly. Voices. Faint. Searching. Maelra moved first, grabbing Elias and pulling him behind one of the larger crypt structures just as torchlight flickered at the far tunnel entrance. "Royal soldiers. 3 of them. Check every lower tunnel," one guard muttered. "Captain Varro wants reports immediately." The name visibly affected Maelra. Elias noticed. "Who's Varro?" he whispered carefully. The queen's expression darkened. "Lucien Varro." Her voice lowered almost dangerously. "The king's best hunter." The soldiers moved closer. Torchlight danced across the crypt walls now. Elias's heartbeat hammered violently against his ribs. One wrong sound, and they were dead. Then suddenly one soldier stopped walking. "Hear that?" Silence. Elias barely breathed. Water dripped somewhere nearby. The guard slowly raised his torch toward their hiding place. And Maelra's eyes shifted gold again. Not human gold. Something older. Something terrifying. The air itself suddenly felt heavier. The nearest torch flickered violently, then went out. Darkness swallowed the catacombs instantly. The guards panicked. What happened? Magic. Before they could react, Maelra moved. Elias barely saw her. 1 second she crouched beside him. The next the tunnel exploded with screams. Chains cracked like whips through darkness. Stone shattered. Men cried out in terror somewhere ahead. Then silence returned almost instantly. When Elias finally lifted the lantern with trembling hands, all three soldiers lay unconscious across the tunnel floor. Maelra stood above them, breathing hard. The faint golden glow vanished slowly from her eyes. Elias stared at her in horror. The queen noticed immediately. "There," she said bitterly. "That's the monster your kingdom fears." But Elias looked at the unconscious soldiers. Not dead, only stunned. And somehow that frightened him more. Because monsters would have killed them. Instead, the chained queen spared them anyway. By morning, Elias's face was hanging across half the capital. Crude wanted posters covered market walls, tavern doors, guard stations, and church pillars. The drawings barely looked like him, but the reward written beneath certainly attracted attention. Wanted for treason against the crown. Elias Thorne. Accomplice to the Ashfang queen. Reward, 500 gold. 500 gold. Elias stared at the poster nailed outside an abandoned bakery while snow drifted softly around the empty street. "I've officially become expensive," he muttered weakly. Behind him, Maelra remained hidden beneath a stolen traveler's cloak. Though hiding a nearly 7-foot orc woman with broken chains wrapped around her arms was proving difficult. "You are also an idiot," she replied. "That part happened first." Despite everything, the corner of her mouth almost moved. Almost. The capital felt different now. Dangerous. Not because soldiers filled the streets, though there were certainly enough of them, but because everyone was watching everyone else. Fear had infected the city overnight. Merchants whispered behind locked stalls. Guards searched random homes. Refugees were dragged into questioning simply for having green eyes or foreign accents. And everywhere Elias looked, people spoke about the escaped queen like the world was ending. She killed 20 guards. She burned the lower district. She's building an orc army beneath the city. None of it was true. Elias knew because he'd been beside her the entire time. The queen listened silently as rumors spread around them like disease. Finally, Elias glanced toward her. "Doesn't it bother you?" "What?" "The lies." Maelra pulled her hood lower. "People believe whatever helps them sleep at night." The answer sounded practiced, like someone who stopped defending themselves years ago. They moved carefully through the lower districts, avoiding patrols while snow continued falling steadily over the city rooftops. Elias guided them through narrow side streets he knew from stable deliveries, though every corner felt more dangerous now. Then they passed the Old River district, and Elias finally saw the capital clearly for the first time in his life. Children huddled beside frozen alley fires wrapped in torn blankets. War veterans missing limbs begged outside taverns while nobles rode past in heated carriages pretending not to notice. Refugees slept beneath bridges while palace banners celebrating victory over barbarism hung proudly above the streets. The kingdom suddenly looked less heroic than it did yesterday. Maelra noticed where he was staring. "This war ended 3 years ago," she said quietly. "Yet your people still starve." Elias frowned. "Winters are always hard." "No," Maelra corrected softly. "Greed is always hard." That stayed with him. By afternoon, they reached the abandoned textile warehouse near the Southern Canal District. Elias used to deliver horse feed nearby years ago before the business collapsed. Nobody came here anymore, which made it perfect. Inside, dust covered everything. Broken looms sat rotting beside collapsed crates while cold wind slipped through holes in the roof. Elias lit a tiny lantern and finally allowed himself to breathe again. "We stay here tonight." Maelra leaned heavily against one wall. Her condition still worried him. The strange glowing marks beneath her skin appeared more often now, especially whenever she used magic. "You need rest," Elias said. The queen gave him a dry look. "You sound like an elderly grandmother. You nearly collapsed twice today." "Only twice." Elias crossed his arms stubbornly. Maelra sighed, then surprisingly obeyed. She lowered herself beside the old loom slowly, wincing slightly as broken chains scraped against stone. Elias sat nearby after a moment of hesitation. Silence settled around them while wind howled softly through the warehouse beams. Then suddenly, "Why did you free me?" Elias looked up. The queen wasn't looking at him. Her voice sounded genuinely confused. "I don't know," he admitted honestly. "Yes, you do." He thought about it. The tower. The beatings. The way she fed starving children despite being half-starved herself. Finally, he shrugged weakly. "You looked lonely." Maelra went completely still. For several long seconds, she said nothing at all. Then quietly, That is the stupidest reason anyone has ever started a revolution. Before Elias could respond, the warehouse doors exploded inward. Both of them jumped to their feet instantly. Snow and torchlight flooded the entrance. A line of armored soldiers poured inside, and at their center stood a tall man in black military armor with a scar crossing one eye. Captain Lucien Varro, the kingdom's greatest hunter. His cold gray gaze settled directly on Maelra, then shifted toward Elias. You, he said calmly, have caused me an unbelievable amount of paperwork. The soldiers surrounded the warehouse in perfect silence. No shouting, no panic, just disciplined steel and torchlight closing around Elias from every direction while snow blew through the shattered doorway behind Captain Lucien Varro. Elias immediately understood why people feared him. It wasn't because the captain looked monstrous. It was because he looked calm, terrifyingly calm. Varro stepped into the warehouse slowly, boots scraping across old, dust-covered stone. His black military coat carried the silver wolf insignia of the royal hunters, and unlike the other soldiers surrounding them, he kept his sword sheathed. His attention remained fixed entirely on Maelra. "Your Majesty," he said evenly. The queen's expression hardened instantly. "Lucien." Elias blinked. They knew each other. That realization somehow made everything worse. The captain noticed his reaction immediately. "Yes," he said dryly without looking away from Maelra. "We've met." The queen stepped slightly in front of Elias protectively. "Interesting. I assume you're here to drag me back to the tower," she growled. Varro's eyes shifted briefly toward the broken chains around her wrists. "No." That single word froze the entire room. Even the soldiers looked confused. Maelra narrowed her eyes dangerously. "Explain." The captain removed one glove slowly. Beneath it, old scars crossed his hand and wrist marks that looked strangely familiar. "Chain scars." Elias stared. Varro noticed. "So observant," he murmured faintly. The captain glanced toward his own soldiers. "Leave us." Several guards hesitated immediately. "Captain." That, Lucien interrupted coldly, was not a request. The soldiers obeyed reluctantly, backing out into the snowstorm until only the four of them remained inside the warehouse. Silence settled heavily. Then Varro finally looked directly at Elias. "You should have run after breaking the chains." "I'm starting to hear that often." A faint, almost smile touched the captain's face before vanishing instantly. Then he turned toward Maelra again. "Garrick knows you're free." The queen's entire posture changed. Cold, sharp, dangerous. "Garrick Voss is dead." "No," Varro said quietly. "That's what the kingdom told everyone after the war." He paused. "It was a lie." Elias frowned. "Who's Garrick?" Neither answered immediately. Then Maelra spoke like someone forcing broken glass through her throat. "The man who built the prison camps." Cold settled through Elias instantly. Varro nodded once. "He disappeared after the surrender. Officially executed for war crimes." Bitterness edged his voice slightly. "Unofficially protected. By the crown." Maelra snarled. "Yes." The warehouse suddenly felt much smaller. Elias looked between them desperately trying to understand. "You're saying the kingdom protected a war criminal?" Varro's laugh held no humor whatsoever. "The kingdom was built by war criminals." Silence followed, heavy enough to crush breath from lungs. Snow rattled softly against broken windows while torchlight flickered outside the warehouse walls. Finally, Elias looked at the captain carefully. "If you know all this," he asked slowly, "then why are you hunting her?" Varro met his gaze evenly. "Because if I hadn't taken command of the search, someone worse would have." That answer sounded horrifyingly honest. Maelra still hadn't lowered her guard. "You expect me to trust you?" "No." "Good. But you should still listen." Lucien reached into his coat and pulled out folded papers sealed with royal insignias. "The Chancellor issued emergency orders this morning." Maelra took the documents first. Elias watched her expression darken with every line she read. "What?" The queen handed him the papers silently. His stomach dropped immediately. "Execution order. Not for Maelra. For him. Elias Thorne. Condemned for treason and collaboration with enemy forces. Effective immediately." "They sentenced me already?" he whispered. "Without trial," Varro confirmed quietly. "Very efficient system when politically motivated." Elias suddenly felt sick. He wasn't just wanted anymore. He was already dead legally. Maelra's amber eyes burned with fury. "This is because of me." "No," Varro corrected sharply. This is because you embarrassed powerful people publicly. His gaze shifted toward Elias briefly. The stable boy humanized the chained queen. That's dangerous. Elias stared at him. What does that mean? It means symbols matter. Varro stepped closer, voice quieter now. For 3 years the kingdom displayed Maelra as proof monsters could be conquered. Then one starving stable boy cut her free because he pitied her. He shook his head slightly. That story spreads fast, especially among desperate people. Understanding dawned slowly. The kingdom wasn't only hunting them because Maelra escaped. They feared what the escape represented. Hope. Varro looked toward the queen again. Garrick Voss arrives in the capital tomorrow night. Maelra visibly tensed. Impossible. I saw the convoy personally. The warehouse went silent again. Then quietly Elias asked, "Who exactly is Garrick Voss?" This time Varro answered fully. He was the architect of the war. The captain's voice turned colder with every word. Not a general, not a king, a businessman. Disgust sharpened his expression. He made fortunes selling weapons to both sides, organizing prison labor camps, trafficking refugees, extending conflicts whenever peace threatened profits. Elias felt physically ill, and now he wants her back. Yes, Varro replied. Alive. Maelra's chains rattled softly as her fists tightened. Because of what's inside me. Lucian looked directly at her. Yes. Elias frowned immediately. What does that mean? Neither answered, which terrified him more than if they had. Then suddenly the captain stepped back toward the doorway. You have until sunrise before the city fully locks down. He pulled his gloves back on slowly. After that, escape becomes impossible. You're helping us? Elias asked carefully. Varro paused beneath the falling snow. No, he said quietly. I'm helping the kingdom survive what happens if Garrick Voss puts chains back on her. Then the captain disappeared into the storm, leaving Elias alone with the queen and a terrifying realization slowly settling into place. The kingdom feared Maelra escaping, but powerful men feared something else entirely. What would happen if she ever stopped holding herself back? They left the capital before dawn beneath a sky the color of dying fire. Snow still covered the roads outside Vale Cross, while distant watchtowers rang with warning bells behind them. Elias kept his hood low as they moved through frozen farmland north of the city, avoiding patrol roads whenever possible. Every shadow looked dangerous now. Every rider in the distance made his stomach tighten. Officially, he no longer existed as a citizen of the kingdom, only as a criminal waiting to be caught. Maelra walked ahead in silence for most of the journey, her massive cloak hiding the broken chains wrapped around her arms. The farther they traveled from the capital, the more restless she seemed. Sometimes Elias caught faint crimson light flickering beneath her skin again, like embers buried under ash. By the second night, they reached the northern forests. The trees there grew impossibly tall, ancient black pines heavy with snow that blocked most of the moonlight. Elias struggled through waist-deep drifts while Maelra moved effortlessly ahead despite years of imprisonment. You've done this before, he muttered breathlessly. The queen glanced back once. War teaches endurance very quickly. Helpful. Deep in the forest, they finally stopped beside a ruined stone arch half buried beneath ice and roots. Moss-covered ancient carvings worn nearly smooth by time. Elias stared upward. What is this place? Maelra rested one hand against the old stone carefully. Home. Her voice sounded different suddenly. Softer. Sad. The queen pushed through thick vines hidden beneath the archway, revealing a narrow staircase descending into darkness beneath the mountain itself. Cold air drifted upward carrying the scent of stone, ash, and something older than both kingdoms. Elias hesitated. Please tell me this isn't haunted. All meaningful places are haunted. That was somehow the worst answer possible. Maelra almost smiled again. Almost. They descended for several long minutes until the tunnel finally opened into something enormous. Elias stopped breathing. An underground city stretched beneath the mountain. Ancient halls carved directly into black stone towered above them, supported by massive pillars shaped like warriors holding up the earth itself. Broken statues lined wide roads disappearing into darkness, while frozen waterfalls shimmered beneath pale crystal lights embedded in the ceiling overhead. Even abandoned, the place felt alive. What is this? Elias whispered. Ashenhold, Maelra answered quietly. The first city of the Ashfang clans. His eyes widened. I thought humans destroyed it during the war. They tried. Bitterness edged the words sharply. Maelra walked slowly through the ruins like someone visiting a graveyard too large to comprehend. Her hand brushed against cracked walls as if memorizing ghosts hidden inside the stone. Elias noticed something strange then. The architecture didn't look purely Orcish. Some carvings showed human figures standing beside orcs. Together, not fighting. He frowned. Why are humans carved here? Maelra stopped walking. For several moments, she stared silently at one ancient mural stretching across the hall wall. Snow-haired humans and armored orcs stood side by side, raising the same banner. Then quietly, because once we ruled together. Elias blinked. What? The kingdoms existed before the wars. Maelra's voice echoed softly through the ruins. Trade, alliances, shared cities, mixed bloodlines. Her jaw tightened slightly. Then powerful men discovered fear was easier to control than peace. The realization hit Elias hard. Everything he learned growing up had been a lie. Again, how much history did they erase? He asked quietly. Enough. They continued deeper into Ashenhold until they reached enormous stone doors covered in silver symbols glowing faintly beneath centuries of dust. The queen stopped there. For the first time since escaping the capital, she looked uncertain. What's in there? Elias asked carefully. Maelra stared at the doors. My burden. Then she pressed both hands against the ancient symbols. The mountain trembled. Massive gears hidden deep within the stone roared awake, while the sealed doors slowly opened inward, revealing a circular chamber illuminated by pale blue fire. At the center stood a black stone pedestal, and resting atop it, a crown. Not gold, not silver, dark iron shaped like twisting flames, with crimson gemstones glowing faintly between the metal. The moment Elias saw it, the air itself felt heavier. Older. Dangerous. Maelra approached slowly, almost reverently. The Ashfang crown, she whispered. Elias swallowed hard. It's beautiful. No, the queen said quietly. It's terrible. She reached toward it carefully, but stopped inches away. Her hands trembled slightly. Why are you afraid of it? Elias asked. Maelra's amber eyes reflected the crown's crimson glow. Because this crown does not choose rulers, she said softly. It chooses weapons. Before Elias could answer, a deep voice echoed suddenly through the chamber entrance behind them. And unfortunately for all of us, the voice said calmly, it already chose you once before. They spun around instantly. Captain Lucien Varro stood in the doorway, sword drawn this time. The sound of Lucien Varro drawing his sword echoed through the ancient chamber like metal dragged across bones. Elias immediately stepped backward while Maelra turned slowly toward the captain, every muscle in her body tightening beneath the dim blue firelight. For one long, terrible moment, nobody moved. Then Lucien sighed. You always did choose dramatic hiding places. Maelra's voice came out low and dangerous. You followed us. Yes. You brought soldiers? No. The queen studied him carefully. Elias noticed something strange then. Lucien looked exhausted. Not physically, emotionally, like a man standing too close to decisions he could never undo. The captain lowered his sword slightly, but didn't sheath it. I came alone. That was stupid, Maelra replied. Probably. Elias looked between them nervously. Can someone please explain why nobody is attacking yet? Lucien finally glanced toward him. Because if I intended to arrest her, stable boy, you would already be dead. Comforting. Deeply comforting. Maelra still looked unconvinced. You expect trust after 12 years hunting me? Lucien's expression hardened instantly. I hunted enemies of the crown. His gray eyes darkened. You were never my enemy. Silence fell heavily across the chamber. Elias frowned. What does that mean? Neither answered immediately. Then Lucien slowly walked toward the pedestal where the Ashfang crown rested untouched. His gaze lingered on it with visible unease. That thing should have been destroyed centuries ago. Maelra crossed her arms. It cannot be destroyed. Yes, Lucien muttered darkly. That's usually how cursed objects work. Elias stared between them. You both keep talking like I already understand any of this. The queen looked toward the crown, then finally spoke. The Ashfang bloodline was not merely royal. Her voice echoed softly through the chamber. We were guardians. Guardians of what? Maelra hesitated. Lucien answered instead. Magic. The words settled through the chamber like another living thing. Elias blinked. I thought magic was just spells and healing and… No, Lucian interrupted quietly. Real magic is older than kingdoms. He glanced toward the crown again. Older than humans. Older than orcs. The blue flames lining the chamber flickered harder suddenly, as if reacting to the conversation itself. Maelra stepped closer to the pedestal. This crown binds directly to blood. Her voice softened strangely. To wear it means carrying every memory, every rage, every death of the rulers before you. Elias frowned. That sounds horrifying. It is. Lucian nodded once. The crown amplifies emotion into power. His jaw tightened. Especially grief. A terrible realization hit Elias then. That's why the chains existed. Neither denied it. Maelra slowly looked at her scarred wrists. The kingdom feared what would happen if grief and rage reached the crown again. Not the kingdom, Lucian corrected sharply. Garrick. At the name, the chamber seemed to grow colder. Lucian sheathed his sword finally. You deserve the full truth now. Maelra's expression darkened. No. Yes. The captain's voice hardened. He's already involved. And Garrick arrives tomorrow. Elias swallowed nervously. Someone explain before I lose my mind. Lucian exhaled slowly. 12 years ago, during the final months of the war, Garrick Voss discovered something buried beneath Ashenhold. He gestured toward the ancient city surrounding them. A source of old magic tied directly to the Ashfang bloodline. Maelra's fists tightened. He wanted control of it. He wanted weapons, Lucian corrected. Always weapons. Elias looked toward the crown again, uneasily. And Maelra? Lucian met his eyes carefully. She survived the binding. Silence. Then Elias blinked. The what? The queen closed her eyes briefly. When she spoke again, her voice sounded distant. The crown chooses one ruler every generation. Her fingers brushed lightly against the iron edges. But survival is rare. A bitter smile touched her lips. Most die when the memories enter. Lucian looked grim. She didn't. Instead of pride, genuine pain crossed Maelra's face. I should have. The chamber suddenly felt impossibly heavy. Elias looked at her differently now. Not merely as a queen. Not merely as a prisoner. But as someone carrying something ancient enough to terrify entire kingdoms. Then suddenly the mountain trembled violently. Dust rained from the ceiling. All three froze instantly. Lucian's hand snapped back toward his sword. That, he said sharply, is very bad. A second tremor shook the chamber harder than before. Then came the sound. Distant. Massive. Like enormous gates opening somewhere deep beneath the mountain. Maelra's face went pale instantly. No. Elias stared. What? The queen slowly turned toward the darkness beyond the chamber walls. Fear entered her voice for the first time. He found the lower vaults. Lucian cursed under his breath. Garrick. Another tremor rolled beneath Ashenhold. This time accompanied by something worse. A roar. Deep. Ancient. Not human. Not orc. Something buried beneath the mountain itself had just awakened. The roar echoed through Ashenhold hard enough to shake dust from the ancient ceiling. Elias felt it in his chest before he fully heard it. A sound too deep to belong to any living creature. The blue fire lining the chamber walls flickered violently, while another tremor rolled beneath the mountain. Far below them came the grinding noise of massive stone doors opening after centuries untouched. Lucian drew his sword instantly. Move, he ordered. Maelra didn't. Her eyes remained fixed on the darkness beyond the chamber entrance, every muscle rigid beneath the crimson glow now spreading stronger beneath her skin. No, she whispered. Elias looked at her nervously. What is that? The queen answered without looking away from the tunnel. Our punishment. Another roar thundered upward through the city ruins. Closer now. Lucian grabbed Elias by the arm. We do not stay here. This time Maelra moved. Fast. They sprinted through the ancient halls while the mountain continued shaking around them. Cracks spread along old stone roads. Massive statues collapsed in distant corridors. Somewhere deep beneath Ashenhold, something enormous dragged itself awake after centuries sleeping underground. Elias struggled to keep up. What exactly did Garrick find down there? Lucian answered grimly while running. The old vaults. That explains absolutely nothing. It's enough. Not remotely enough. They reached one of the upper bridgeways crossing the center of Ashenhold just as another explosion shook the city. Stone shattered somewhere below, followed by screams. Human screams. Elias froze. There are people down there. Mercenaries, Lucian snapped. Garrick's excavation teams. Maelra stopped at the bridge edge, staring downward into the lower ruins. Then Elias saw it too. Torchlight. Hundreds of lights moving through the darkness beneath the city. And at their center stood a man wearing a long crimson coat beside a massive broken stone gate. Even from this distance, he looked wrong somehow. Too calm. Too confident. Like someone standing exactly where he intended to be. Garrick Voss. The man raised one hand casually while workers dragged strange black metal crates through the open vault doors. Then the ground exploded. A gigantic stone hand burst upward through the lower ruins, crushing scaffolding and mercenaries instantly beneath its weight. The entire bridge beneath Elias trembled violently as something colossal pulled itself free from the underground darkness. Not flesh, stone. An enormous humanoid creature carved from black rock slowly emerged from beneath Ashenhold itself. Ancient, glowing symbols burned across its body while fragments of broken chains still hung from its arms. Elias stopped breathing. What is that? Maelra's voice came out hollow. A warden. The creature's glowing eyes ignited bright crimson. Then it roared again. Mercenaries scattered in terror below, while Garrick himself remained perfectly still watching the giant, with visible fascination instead of fear. Lucian swore violently. He woke it fully. The warden slammed one massive arm downward, obliterating an entire stone roadway beneath it. The impact shook the mountain hard enough that Elias nearly lost his footing. How do we stop that thing? Maelra's expression turned grim. We don't. The queen suddenly moved toward the bridge stairs descending into the lower city. Lucian grabbed her arm immediately. No. It guards Ashenhold, she snapped. If Garrick controls it. He doesn't, Lucian interrupted sharply. That's the problem. Below them, the giant turned slowly toward Garrick's forces, then began killing everything. Stone fists smashed through excavation crews like paper. Entire sections of ancient ruins collapsed beneath its weight. Mercenaries fled screaming while the warden tore through them indiscriminately. But Garrick Voss still didn't run. Instead, he smiled. Elias felt cold realization settle into his stomach. He wanted this. Lucian nodded once. Yes. Why? Because chaos hides theft. The captain pointed downward toward the open vaults beneath the warden. Workers were still dragging black crates outward through the destruction. Not random treasure. Specific cargo. Maelra saw it too. The Heartstones. Lucian's face darkened. Gods. Elias looked between them desperately. What are Heartstones? Neither answered immediately. Then Maelra whispered, enough magic to burn kingdoms. The warden roared again. This time its glowing eyes shifted upward. Toward them. The creature saw the queen. And suddenly everything stopped. The giant froze motionless amid the ruins below while crimson light intensified across the ancient symbols carved into its stone body. Then slowly, it knelt. The entire city seemed to go silent. Mercenaries stopped running. Lucian stared in disbelief. Even Garrick Voss finally looked surprised. Far below them, the massive stone guardian lowered its head before Queen Maelra of Ashfang like a soldier recognizing its ruler after centuries waiting in darkness. Elias looked toward her carefully. You said it guards the city. Maelra's face had gone pale. Yes. The warden lifted its head again. And somewhere deep beneath Ashenhold, more roars answered back. The answering roars echoed beneath Ashenhold one after another. Not one creature. Many. Elias felt the sound vibrate through the ancient bridge beneath his boots, while far below the first warden remained kneeling before Queen Maelra, crimson eyes blazing through the ruined city like twin fires in the dark. Then the mountain moved again. Massive cracks split across distant stone roads as something enormous shifted beneath the underground kingdom. Dust rolled through the air. Ancient pillars groaned. Somewhere below came the grinding sound of gigantic bodies dragging themselves awake after centuries buried beneath stone and silence. Lucian's expression hardened instantly. We leave. Now. Maelra didn't move. Her amber eyes remained locked on the kneeling guardian below. It remembers me, she whispered. No, Lucian said sharply. It remembers your bloodline. The distinction clearly mattered. Far beneath them, Garrick Voss slowly stepped forward through the chaos, while terrified mercenaries scrambled around him. Somehow he still looked composed despite standing inside an awakening ancient city guarded by colossal stone monsters. Elias hated him immediately. "What's he doing?" he asked nervously. Lucian followed Garrick's movements carefully. "Adjusting. That sounds bad. It's very bad." The warden suddenly turned toward Garrick's forces again. Not attacking. Watching. Waiting. Like a hound waiting for command. Maelra's face changed instantly. "He's trying to bind it." Lucian swore under his breath. Elias frowned. "Can he?" "No human should be able to," Maelra answered. "The wardens obey only the Ashfang line." Then why did she sound uncertain? Far below, Garrick raised one of the black heartstones from the open vault crates. Crimson light spilled across the ruins, immediately twisting through the air like living smoke. The kneeling warden shuddered violently. Its glowing eyes flickered. Lucian's voice turned grim. He found another way. The entire bridge shook again as a second warden burst upward through the lower ruins nearby, larger than the first, and covered in ancient battle scars carved directly into the stone. Mercenaries screamed. This one didn't kneel. It attacked immediately. A single massive strike collapsed an entire district of Ashenhold beneath, falling debris and dust. Garrick's forces scattered while crimson light from the heartstone pulsed harder around him. "He's provoking them," Lucian realized. "Why?" Elias demanded. Maelra answered quietly. "Because frightened creatures are easier to control." That sounded far too familiar. The queen suddenly started down the bridge stairs. Lucian grabbed her arm again. "If you go down there, he'll trap you." "If I don't," she snapped back, "those things will reach the surface." Silence. Elias looked toward the lower city. She was right. If multiple wardens escaped Ashenhold entirely, Vilcross would die. Thousands would die. Lucian knew it too. His jaw tightened visibly. There may still be another option. Maelra looked at him sharply. "What?" The captain hesitated. Then finally, "The crown." The queen's expression immediately darkened. "No." Elias looked between them. "What does the crown do?" Neither answered quickly enough. Then another roar thundered through Ashenhold as the second warden ripped apart part of the lower vault district, searching wildly for something. Or someone. Lucian stepped closer to Maelra. "If the wardens still recognize the Ashfang bloodline, then the crown may allow direct command. And destroy what remains of me in the process," she replied coldly. The captain didn't deny it. Elias felt dread crawl through his stomach. "What does that mean?" Maelra finally looked toward him. Really looked. And for the first time since meeting her, he saw fear completely uncovered inside her eyes. "The crown does not give power freely," she said softly. "It consumes the person wearing it piece by piece." Lucian's voice lowered. "The last 3 Ashfang rulers lost themselves entirely after binding." Elias stared. "So don't use it." The queen laughed bitterly. "If only choices were that simple." Below them, Garrick suddenly shouted something toward the ruins. Mercenaries rolled massive iron devices toward the kneeling warden, chains covered in glowing runes almost identical to the restraints once wrapped around Maelra herself. Elias understood instantly. "He's trying to enslave them." "Yes," Maelra whispered. The first chain launcher fired. Massive enchanted restraints slammed around the warden's arm with explosive force. Crimson runes ignited immediately across the creature's stone body. The guardian roared in agony. Not rage. Pain. Something inside Elias twisted hard at the sound. Garrick smiled. And that smile decided everything. Maelra turned abruptly and sprinted back across the bridge toward the chamber containing the Ashfang crown. Lucian cursed before following. Elias ran after both of them, while Ashenhold continued collapsing beneath the awakening guardians. "What are we doing?" he shouted. Lucian answered grimly without slowing. "Trying to save the world before your queen accidentally destroys herself, saving it first." The chamber of the Ashfang crown trembled violently as they returned. Dust drifted from the ceiling, while distant roars shook the ancient city below. Blue fire poured across the walls in restless waves now, reacting to the chaos spreading through Ashenhold like the mountain itself had become afraid. At the center of the chamber, the black iron crown waited silently atop its stone pedestal. Watching, waiting. Maelra stopped before it, breathing hard. Lucian stood several steps behind her, sword still drawn, though neither of them seemed worried about enemies anymore. The real danger sat directly in front of them. Elias looked toward the queen carefully. "You really think that thing will help?" "No." Maelra answered honestly. I think it will cost me everything. Another roar echoed upward. Closer. The wardens were climbing. Lucian moved beside Elias quietly while Maelra stared at the crown. If she binds fully, the captain murmured. Do not let her remain connected too long. Elias frowned immediately. What happens if she does? Lucian's gray eyes stayed fixed on the queen. She stops being herself. Cold settled into Elias's chest. Maelra slowly reached toward the crown. Her fingers trembled. For the first time since meeting her, Elias realized the queen was truly terrified. Not of dying, of losing herself. Then softly she spoke without turning around. When the chains held me beneath the execution tower, her voice nearly disappeared beneath the shaking mountain. Part of me hated them. Elias stayed silent. But another part, she swallowed once. Another part was relieved. Lucian closed his eyes briefly, like the words physically hurt to hear. Maelra's hand hovered inches from the crown. The chains suppressed the magic, she whispered. The rage. The memories. Her voice cracked slightly. After enough years, I no longer knew where the crown ended and I began. Elias suddenly understood. The kingdom hadn't only imprisoned her. In some terrible way, they had also protected the world from what she might become. Below them came another explosion, followed by collapsing stone. The wardens were reaching the upper city now. Lucian stepped forward sharply. Maelra! The queen finally touched the crown. Everything changed instantly. Crimson fire erupted across the chamber walls. The mountain roared. Elias staggered backward as ancient voices flooded the air, hundreds of whispers speaking at once in languages older than kingdoms themselves. The crown lifted slowly from the pedestal, surrounded by burning red light, while Maelra screamed through clenched teeth. Not physical pain. Memory. Elias saw flashes around them then. War. Fire. Orc rulers standing atop battlefields. Human armies kneeling beside Ashfang kings beneath united banners. Then betrayal. Blood. Cities burning. The crown remembered everything. Maelra fell to one knee as crimson light spread across her body completely. Her eyes ignited gold brighter than ever before while ancient symbols burned across her skin. Lucian grabbed Elias immediately. Stay back. The queen slowly rose again. Different now. Older somehow. More dangerous. When she finally spoke, multiple voices echoed beneath her own. The mountain wakes. Elias felt terror crawl through him. Not because she sounded monstrous. Because she sounded inhumanly calm. Far below, Ashenhold suddenly fell silent. Then every warden roared together. Maelra lifted one hand slowly, and the entire underground city obeyed. Stone guardians froze instantly throughout the ruins. Mercenaries scattered in panic while ancient pathways shifted beneath the queen's command. Massive gates slammed shut, trapping Garrick's excavation teams beneath collapsing districts. The mountain itself bent around her will. Lucian stared in visible horror. She bound too deeply. Maelra turned toward the chamber exit, or toward the city beyond it. It became difficult to tell which she truly saw anymore. We end this now. Her voice shook the walls. Elias ran after her desperately. Maelra, wait. The queen paused. Slowly she looked back toward him. For one terrible second Elias feared she no longer recognized him. Then softly, little stable boy. Relief nearly collapsed his knees. You're still you, he whispered. For now. That answer terrified him more than anything else. They emerged onto the upper bridge overlooking Ashenhold just as Garrick Voss finally saw her. Really saw her. The crowned queen standing above the city wrapped in crimson fire while ancient stone giants knelt beneath her command. For the first time, Garrick looked afraid. Maelra's voice thundered across Ashenhold. You chained me beneath your towers. The wardens rose behind her. You murdered my people. The mountain shook harder. You turned suffering into profit. Far below, mercenaries fled screaming as the ancient city awakened completely around them. Then Maelra raised one glowing hand toward Garrick Voss, and every warden in Ashenhold turned to face him together. Lucian immediately grabbed Elias's shoulder hard. Get ready. For what? The captain's expression darkened. Either the kingdom survives tonight. He looked toward the burning queen standing above the ancient city. Or history ends here.